the EscapeGoat podcast. A podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Welcome to the EscapeGoat podcast. I'm glad to welcome my brother Matt back to the show. How are you doing, Matt?
Hey dude, I'm very well, thank you. I've actually been to a day spa today, and so I've had my back thoroughly destroyed, but in the best possible way. I feel a lot better for it.
It's amazing what people pay for, isn't it?
Yeah. It's amazing what people can be paid to do.
Yes, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
No, I'd love to get somewhere where I could be destroyed at my leisure. That's
Yeah.
car crushing facility. No, that sounds great. And I, obviously you've just recently moved house as well, haven't you? That's been like kind of your big project that's been going on.
Yeah, so we moved from Withington to Stretford, so kind of Morrissey territory, which is not so good news anymore. But that's love the Smiths, hate Morrissey, I guess.
Sure.
But no, it's very nice. It's really nice around here. It's a quieter area. We were sort of in Studentsville for Withington. Like people who have been there will know it's a great place, a lot of fun, but really really noisy at night. So it's we moved to a slightly more family friendly area.
Yeah. I mean, that's I've been seeing all the the pictures on the family WhatsApp and everything of like the house, coming along and all that kind of stuff.
I'm thoroughly sick of DIY. Actually, that's why the spa today was much needed. I've been up a ladder for literally 4 weeks, and the air can be a bit thin at the top of it. It's
literally just perched on it like some sort of wise man in the desert.
Yeah, pretty much with a paintbrush in hand, and you're just desperately trying, because I don't have that many clothes, and all the clothes I do have are black. So, and the paint that I've been using is either cream or white. So I've literally been trying to avoid like ruining all of my clothes for the last 4 weeks. So yeah, which I didn't do very successfly. So now I have 3 clothes left.
Why you should buy like a smock or something. Really treat yourself.
You get a muumuu, black muumuu.
I like the way that even the thing you buy to keep the paint off the black clothes has to be black.
I can't be. I do not feel comfortable in any other color. It's really strange, and I'm not like a goth by any means. I don't wear like any crazy trinkets or black nail polish or anything. I do like the music of heavy metal. That's for sure.
Sure.
In fact, I found this band that my best friend Mark, Mark.
I do. Yeah.
Got me onto, called. Oh my god, I've actually forgotten the name of them. I've listened to them for 3 weeks. What they called, but they are one of the greatest heavy metal bands I've ever heard in my life. They're called Enforced, and they've got an album that's called Kill Grid, and I'll send you the track later. And I've sort of got this, when I really, really like a heavy metal song, I get into almost like a meditative state where it's not like headbanging, it's more just like holding my hand up like that, and just sort of letting it, I don't know, I just get the goosebumps and it kind of comes all over me. So it's a very meditative thing. But you might get what I mean when I send you the track, but it's fucking incredible anyway. It's like
your version of a gong bath, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, exactly. Being hit by extremely loud noise that's calming. That me and Mark had a chat that Slayer, one of the big four, kind of disbanded recently and just called it a day after 3 decades of touring. This band came about just as they were disbanding, and because the album artwork's all black with like skulls on it and everything like that, we call them Noob Slayer, because it's like Slayer died and then came back to life, like Sub-Zero became like, you get their thing. Mortal Kombat fans will get the reference.
Yeah, I love this series of like almost infinite cultural references like telescoping in on each other. This is I'm kind of ashamed that I do get that reference.
Yeah, that last 15 seconds was a real puzzler. But yeah, like Slayer, you can't kill Slayer; they'll just come back twice as strong, and that's this band basically.
Yeah, the doomsday of metal. Yeah,
I love the idea. Check them out anyway. Anyone who's into heavy metal, because they really are. They're very underground. They're not a big band. They're on Spotify. They're called Enforced. Check it out. The title track Kill Grid on that album is one of the best songs I've ever heard in my life. So yeah, enjoy.
Yeah. While we're on the metal thing, the episode that you and Isabel did on System of a Down, which was the only episode so far. For people wanting to go back and check this out, it's the only episode of the podcast thus far that I've not been on. And Matt and Isabel, who's also been on several episodes before, like wonderfully hosted that and did a sort of like tour through their sort of favourites of System of a Down's back catalogue. That was a great one to listen back to.
That was a great experiment actually, and I was really pleased with the list that we came up with, and I still stand by it. When was that? Like, just surprised me, because I'm sure feels like 3 weeks ago, probably 4 months ago or more.
Oh, it was probably recorded back in May, something like that.
Really?
May 2021. Yeah.
Oh wow, May, June,
so.
July,
if not
August.
April, I was going to say actually. But yeah,
that's terrifying.
Yes. Yeah, things are progressing pretty quick. Yeah, and here we are in the autumn. Anyway, I should probably get into what we're talking about. So I've actually invited Matt on today to talk about a sort of shared childhood favourite movie of ours, which is obviously about half of the internet's dedicated to that. But I think this is still a maybe kind of slightly unexplored one. I don't think it's unexplored, but I think it's. I was actually thinking about this, Matt, because so much nostalgia. People who were children in the 80s is focused on this kind of coming of age, kind of formative kind of childhood fantasy movie, and you see so much nostalgia for like things like Labyrinth and The Never-Ending Story and Willow and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think this is probably the movie we're going to talk about mostly today. Is like it's definitely my kind of version of that.
Yeah.
Because the thing about a lot of those movies is I didn't see a lot of those in childhood. The ones that tend to get wax lyrical about in general about the 80s and stuff that are kids movies. I didn't see a lot of them, and I think some of that was maybe our parents' age, and we'll get a bit into that, especially when we talk about the sort of fandom of this director. But I think this is dead on for that kind of thing, but I think doesn't have quite as mainstream a cult, if you see what I mean. It's kind of because a lot of those movies that I just mentioned are up there with like Dirty Dancing and Top Gun and stuff, aren't they? In terms of what you'd call mainstream cult movies. Yeah,
they're sort of. I think of them as the sort of fantasy films of the 80s, and you've got Legend, Labyrinth, Never-Ending Story. And all those, and Flight of the Navigator, and sort of those things. Yeah. And like you say, I mean, because obviously we pretty much shared a childhood for the most part, so it's like, I didn't see those films either. I came to Legend and Labyrinth much later on, and they didn't have, I mean, they're great films and there's some amazing stuff in them, but obviously they didn't have as big an impact on me later in life, and I think I think nostalgia plays a huge part in films like that, that sort of come, I won't say coming of age movies, but kids that movies that you watch when you're a kid and you really appreciate the fantasy of it. However, Time Bandits was there, and like you say, that was our that sort of filled the void of that for us, and it was also so entwined with the Monty Python movies that we were watching at the same time. We kind of knew that there was a link. I think even at that age, being Terry Gilliam being the director, and obviously starring Michael Palin and John Cleese. So yeah, that gave us a sort of it made you think you were watching the right film.
Yeah, I was thinking actually. I suppose the things that your parents put in front of you in childhood, especially for our generation, were the VHS tapes that were lying around the house that were purchased or more often recorded, and the things that you kind of, in a sense, for your sort of childhood fantasy movies and stuff, you are kind of a bit reliant on your parents, because when you get a bit older and get to see things at other people's houses more often, it's more adult stuff in a way, isn't it? It's like you've kind of not in any superior way, but you've kind of moved past wanting to see those things at other people's houses. Instead, you're going to their houses to watch your Terminators and your Predators and the stuff that's a little bit illicit, and
Aliens and things like that. Yeah, no, totally. Like no one, you don't go around someone's gaff at 13 and they say, do you want to watch Legend? It's like, no, Legend, like that's lame. Like what? Like it's do you want to watch Pulp Fiction, or do you want to watch Reservoir Dogs, or the exit? Well, horror, a lot of horror movies were sort of a badge of honour at that age. So yeah, that's totally true. So if you miss them at that age, it's very, very unlikely that you're necessarily going to pick them up later in life, I think.
Yeah, no, it's true. I suppose a lot of those things that I then saw later were at university or even afterwards. And I suppose as well, we should mention that, like, because you're now the parent of a young son, like you're going to be shifting into that zone soon, aren't you, where you get to watch these things,
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, actually, because my son Luca, he has really started taking an interest in films and will sit and watch. He's not quite sat down and watched the full hour and a half yet, but sequences will get him, so he'll want to see the beginning of a sequence to an end. So, for example, like Jurassic Park, put on the sequence where they first see the dinosaurs. He'll sit there for the 5-6 minutes from the beginning to the end, and when the scene is over, he'll go, rather than just ignoring it completely or not really being interested, and he'll say what's happening, who's that person, and you'll inquire about it. So yeah, it won't be long until we're actually sitting down and watching. I did have I put on Return of the Jedi the other day, which is my favourite Star Wars film, and more or less in the background, as I say, he loved the speeder bike chase. He watched that, but about halfway through one of the sequences, he just says, "Where's BB-8?" And I was like, silence. I was like, yeah, gonna have to deal with a lot of that as well.
You know, I'll come back to you at the end of this podcast and talk about, in terms of the movie we're discussing, when you think Luca would be up for seeing this, or at least when you'd be up for introducing him to it, because I think that's an interesting question, given some of the stuff we'll touch on. But I want to, because you already mentioned the movie we'll talk about is Time Bandits, and obviously anyone listening to this will probably know that. So this was, Terry Gilliam's actually his second feature film as a director after Jabberwocky, which is worth discussion on.
If you think this is weird.
yeah, anyone who's not seen Jabberwocky by Terry Gilliam, that's worth discussion all on its own, and I think actually would make a particularly good companion piece to anyone who's seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, because I think you could take these three, actually. I think you could take Holy Grail, Jabberwocky, and then this, and they're kind of they're not the same kind of movie necessarily, but there's a bit of a continuum there, isn't there, in terms of production design and kind of style and a certain sort of sense of humour and obviously some of the creativity behind it,
I think it's Jabberwocky's like that thing, it's Gilliam without the other Pythons, and it doesn't really work that well because it's style over substance, really. Jabberwocky looks incredible, it looks crazy, it looks like nothing else, but there's not really a driving narrative or much humour, in it. So it just shows when you get these kind of amazing... the Holy Grail's the best, because it was directed by Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam. So Terry Jones was directing the comedy, making sure the jokes landed, and Terry Gilliam was making sure there's enough smoke and that the dragon ships look incredible, and they do. And if you watch the Holy Grail, the production design on it is still insanely great. And it makes it, and because the jokes are set against this very serious, very real, environment in the backdrop. It makes them funnier. Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it, that so if you count the Holy Grail co-direction credit and Jabberwocky, so this is like his kind of second or third feature film, Time Bandits, really, isn't it? And I think when we talk about some of the effects work in it, I was rewatching it yesterday, basically, and I was just looking at some of the effects work, I was just like, wow, he's really doing everything here, isn't he? He's like doing everything he could possibly give a go, and everything he's learned and everything he could learn, and it's just kind of like there's so much, and obviously with I was going to say a bit more money than Jabberwocky, you'd have to have a bit more money than Jabberwocky, wouldn't you? looking at that, I say that was someone
who had some money.
Yeah, I was saying that was someone who's great with great affection for Jabberwocky, but that's that is a budget movie. So I just want, before we get into that though, I just wanted to talk a bit about I suppose Monty Python in general and kind of where it sat in our childhood, because I think obviously Gilliam is famous as one of the Python troupe, and particularly mostly the animator of the original Monty Python's Flying Circus. That's kind of
for people who do not know.
Yeah, well, it's you wonder, don't you? You know what I mean? I don't mean that in a sort of smug, superior sort of comedy nerd sense. I mean in the sense that we were kind of a bit young to be really knowing Monty Python, weren't we? And it was because of the age of our parents just hitting that sweet spot, them being maybe a little bit older than some other people's parents, and us being receptive to it, that we know it as well as we did. I mean, actually, don't get me wrong, I'm sure we would have got around to watching Holy Grail, Life of Brian, things like that without that. But me and Matt, for the listener, me and Matt have watched, I think, pretty much all of Monty Python's Flying Circus, and watched quite a lot of it when we were kids.
Yeah, I'm pretty fanatical about the documentaries as well. I think I've watched hours and hours of documentary about as much as I can. I listen to audiobooks of Michael Palin's diaries, of John Cleese's autobiography. I think I think it's all genius, and I love it still. But I think there is a huge attachment to childhood. Life of Brian felt like a warm blanket when I was a kid. It was really strange. Mm-hmm. I don't quite know why. It's very strange to think that, because it's full of violence and terrible, awful language, blah blah blah. But there was something about it that was like, mine and mine alone, and I felt it. It was very, very comforting back then to just be able to watch it whenever I wanted to, and so yeah, whenever the intro music from Life of Brian comes on, as well as many other moments in Python, I'm taken right back to being a 6-year-old kid, at the VHS.
I think Life of Brian might have. I had never really thought about this, but I think it might have the first full frontal nudity I'd ever seen in anything.
Yes,
it doesn't have like both male and female full frontal nudity.
Yeah, it's just unashamedly like Graham Chapman opening the doors and just thrusting his crotch forward.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And the lady, I forget her name, but the lady who plays his girlfriend,
plays Judith.
She went on to become the mayoress of Aberystwyth, and ended up lifting the ban on Life of Brian, which was still enacted in Aberystwyth.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
When she became mayor in like 2001 or something like that. Isn't that great?
That's hilarious. That's great.
Yeah.
I love that. That must have been like some obscure like blasphemy law or something that was like lingering in the statutes. That's fantastic.
Exactly.
I mean, we the way I think some of your memories of this will be similar, Matt, because we would have come by this similar routes. But my memory of Monty Python's Flying Circus was kind of it was one of those things that was a little bit in between like an illicit substance that was in the house and kind of encouraged, particularly by our dad, because we had quite a lot of recordings of it, which I guess they'd been repeating it in the like late 80s, early 90s, but we also had some purchased VHSs of it, so you had like some of Terry Gilliam's artwork on those, So
yes, I remember that season 2 VHS with the what's it called, Spiny Norman, like the hedgehog on the front.
Yeah, Spiny Norman. Yeah, you had so you had like really outlandish kind of weird collage kind of cartoons all across this thing with like occasional shots of like John Cleese in a ridiculous costume or something, and it's going, what is this, and I remember we've talked about this before, haven't we, but I think most of the stuff we saw initially as kids would have probably been from for people who know it well, like series 1 and 2 of Monty Python probably, and I think there's the particular episode that you and I have reminisced about watching an awful lot, which is the one that has, it's the one with the bishop in it, isn't it?
Yes.
Which just has this incredible, like a lot of that kind of, I guess as they hit the stride kind of Python stuff, that it has this incredible flow to it. And I remember even before I could express this, I remember being kind of, I guess I was probably about sort of 7, 8, 9, that kind of age. I remember just being obsessed with the amazing flow to the episodes. The way that characters could walk in and out of each other's sketches and then leave the show entirely and leave you with something even more insane and wacky and crazy. And then, and obviously Gilliam's, animation, for anyone who's not seen the show, is just such a kind of boosting part of that, isn't it? It really it creates a lot of the kind of the whirlpool of energy that the show still has today in some ways.
Yeah, it's like they say they never had to really come up with an end of a sketch because they knew that the Gilliam animation would just carry them over to the next point. They didn't have to be a punchline or like an end to it. It could just, they would sort of like, just provide the transition. But you do feel like when you're watching Flying Circus, especially season 2, I think that you're in Python world. You're in this situation where you could go to you could travel from the woods to the city, and you would be like in a, in Python's like sort of environment, and it's like, it was just so seamless. That episode in particular was actually brought up by Michael Palin in his diaries. He said, I'm watching this episode on TV when it's aired and like thinking, yes, this is working. This is actually this is really good. Because he's obviously incredibly modest about his work in his diaries, but like he says, I really felt that this was really well held together and had a great flow to it.
Yeah, well, they're like little sort of like burlesque art films in a way, aren't they? And I say that as someone who's suffered through an awful lot of art films, and they're often a lot more fun than that. But I also kind of, something I didn't see till years later, but also really like is the Beatles Magical Mystery Tour, which I guess that came out. I used to know this. I think that came out Christmas '67, as far as I remember, and that was before Monty Python was on telly. Although obviously a lot of the stuff they were doing before on TV, like Don't Adjust Your Set and things like that, were coming out then. But what I mean by that is the sort of whimsical travelogue, sort of surreal geographical journey feel to it. I'm sure I'm sure they would have picked up on that.
There's no doubt that they probably owe like a lot to the Beatles in terms of the musical influence and inspiration as well, because there's obviously the surreal nature of a lot of the Beatles stuff, especially Sgt. Pepper and Yellow Submarine and stuff. Which came out. I mean, I always forget how like ancient the Beatles stuff is. It's 60. Did the Beatles get going in 62 or 63 or something like that?
I mean, they started releasing recorded stuff in like 62. Yeah, it's
and they didn't get too silly until like the mid 60s. But it's like there was no doubt an influence on Python, because they would have been listening to them.
I think that influence of that, and also things like, I'm a big fan of The Prisoner, and that comes out in the kind of I think that might be 68 as well. I think that's into 68 as far as I remember, and that's got that kind of strange psychedelic journey aspect to it as well. And actually, the prisoner. Particularly if fans listen to this will know, like the trial scenes in it in the finale and things like that. Bits of the first season of Monty Python that spoof judges and civil servants and like that. Basically respectable upper middle class society feel like they're almost like a sequel to The Prisoner. Like they're almost just taking it further down the rabbit hole, so to speak.
I was watching the trial of Mr. Larch the other day. The blokes. It's only a bloody parking offence. that whole sketch. And it was just I remember just sort of being. By the time Cardinal Richelieu comes along, I was just absolutely in tears.
Oh,
I just thought how it was like when I went to see Terminator 2 at the cinema like fairly recently, and in 4K or whatever. And I just thought when it got to like Arnie on the front of the the liquid nitrogen truck, I just thought this is just amazing. There's all these things you've seen it a trillion times, but when you look back, on things that you really you watched. When you every day when you were a kid, and you really sort of break them down and you compare them to stuff that's coming out now and stuff like that, you just think this is real genius stuff. It's insane.
That's probably the first time anyone's compared Terminator 2 to Michael Palin dressed as Cardinal Richelieu.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Just want to say I'm so glad to be here. I just love your country.
Oh, so good. Oui.
I sure did that thing.
I promise this wouldn't turn into just quoting Monty Python bit, but it's. I think that it's interesting you mentioned that sketch actually, because that's right. If it's not in the very first episode, it's certainly in the first handful, and you've still got that kind of almost like blackout theatre kind of minimalist kind of almost like they're doing a Fringe sketch or something, haven't you? Like it's kind of the bits and pieces of the flow of the episode are starting to happen. That the episodes are starting to work like that big mad collage that they'll sort of perfect later, but there is still of a sort of more relatively traditional, almost like Beyond the Fringe feel to the whole thing as well,
I got the kind of sense of the production values of it when, like, again, reading the diaries and like sort of them talking about going to these places in Scotland to film, a Viking going, was wearing, for like one sketch and then cut. That's like the only line. And, it's this in the same way that, Vic and Bob later on and things like The Fast Show went to those mad extremes, but that's just what makes it even more funny because you could. I think intrinsically you kind of know that there's big production value here and that they've really gone to lengths to get these shots and stuff. Having said that, comedy isn't really any funnier if it's super low budget. It's like if it's funny, it's funny. It doesn't really matter. But I think for the surreal nature of it, that just makes it just so much better.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because we did a previous episode of this podcast where we talked about, two now, where we talked about Blackadder. But when we talk about the Blackadder first series, we were talking about location filming and how it can or cannot work in comedy, or at least contribute towards comedy. But I think one of the things that really fascinated me about Monty Python's Flying Circus when I was a kid was the location filming and the way it was intercut with the studio stuff. Because they actually, and obviously they're self-aware enough to even make jokes about, aren't they? Like the bit when they're, for instance, that bit when they're in the house and they realise they're surrounded by film. Yeah. So they actually make jokes about the stock medium changing, like visibly to the audience. And but I thought, because I live in London now, and me and Matt grew up in South Manchester, and we the London of my childhood, we had a family friend in Wimbledon, so we occasionally went there, but it was very kind of abstract from we didn't really get the geography of London or how that connected to anything like that. But the sort of childhood fantasy London of my imagination was essentially that of location filming of 60s and 70s sitcoms, and actually particularly Monty Python, because like that kind of, they'll just be doing a bit with, the Pepper Potts dress at a bus stop or some like eccentric, or the bit when John Cleese is doing introducing the silly walk down the street, with all the gas repairmen, like pile that down the street. So
just the brown
that
coats,
kind of surreal, that sort of surreal suburban London. I kind of, in some ways, I still want to see that. When I go to like West London today or something, it's like, obviously it's not what London is like anymore by and large, but it's,
I know what you mean, like just all the symbols and the sort of bus stops and like, all the stuff. I know exactly what you mean. Like there was something, I was so fond of that aesthetic. You know what I mean? Like in a way, and again, it's like you're in Python. If you could see that in real life, then you were sort of in Python world.
Yeah, well, it's the relative emptiness as well, isn't it? The relatively few cars, Although actually, on reflection, it's probably because they film most of that stuff at like 6 a.m. or so, whatever.
Well, no, but you're right though. Like the M4 motorway scene, when they win the M4 motorway in a raffle or whatever, and they stood there with the dead Indian and the dung. Like in the middle of the M4, and like there's one car like going along it, And I was on the M60 today, and I can tell you that's certainly not the case now. bloody hell, it's like the contrast is insane.
Yeah, so kind of it's a gateway into another world, isn't it? It's funny actually. We were talking about Monty Python in the context of the '60s and its '60s influences, but it was a kind of a mind bender to me when I got a bit older and I realised that actually, like, almost all of Monty Python's actual Monty Python work is in the '70s. You know, like the show actually starts in the '60s, but it's one of those things like. The Simpsons is basically started in the '80s, but is a '90s show. You know, it's exactly the same, isn't it? Like almost all of Monty Python's seminal work is in the '70s. You know.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And the thing about Python as a product of the '70s is obviously, you know, they gain this, I suppose, like fairly mainstream cult following in Britain. I mean, it's sort of debatable in today's terminology how much of a cult following you could have if you were on one of 3 channels. You know, this is kind of
yeah.
You know, this is interesting. You know, but then they got big in in the States and Canada, and you know, it certainly became a sort of viable commercial proposition then, and did their big shows, and you know that's probably why they could, you know, that and George Harrison's large S is why they could do things like the Holy Grail. And
remember my voice? I do trailers, all kinds of trailers.
23, take 2.
One day they'll put me in a film, a proper full-length job. Until then, I'm just stuck with this sort of stuff. Go and see this. Don't miss that. The most terrifying thing you ever saw is coming to babysit for you tonight.
All right, cut it there. Look, just read what's on the script, will you?
What?
The script. Other way up.
Ah. Ready?
Yes, yes.
You flock to see brief encounters for the special...
Close.
Huh? Close encounters.
Close Encounters, the film.
Oh, I never saw it.
Well, forget that film. We're on about our film. Time Bandits.
The what?
Time Bandits, the one you are supposed to be promoting. Remember?
You flock to see Close Encounters for the special effects. You went to Superman to see a man fly. You went to Star Wars for the droids. You went...
Now what?
What's page 2, man?
It's under page 1. See? Oh, dear.
You went to Star Wars for the droids. Time Bandits can offer you much, much more. It's not the special effects, or flying men, or droids, which makes Time Bandits a unique cinematique...
Cinematic! You know, pertaining to the cinema.
Cinematic experience, it's the makeup. Yes, folks, you've never seen anything like it. Men made up to look like monsters. Monsters made up to look like men. Look-alike men made up to look different. Different men made up to look alike. No expense has been spared on the pan stick. No expense has been spared flying in the world's greatest makeup man.
Just a minute. What about the plot?
The what?
The plot. What the film is about.
Well, I haven't seen it, have I?
Haven't seen it? You're sitting there telling millions of people to go and see a film you haven't even seen?
Well, I can't see every film I do now, can I?
Oh, wonderful. Terrific. Look, give me that.
What are you doing?
Taking over. You're out. O-U-T. Finished. Kaput. Finito.
What about the trailer?
I'll do it. Time Bandits is an awfully good film. We have worked ever so hard on it. It's a tremendous adventure story. We like it, and we're pretty sure you will. What's wrong with it? It's direct, punchy, honest.
Honest. Honest. Modest. What's that got to do with it?
Terry Gilliam. I told you, like, lazily doing some sort of biographical refresher research on Terry Gilliam's life. Today I was listening to his Desert Island Discs thing that he did in 2011.
Oh yeah.
You know, obviously there's tons and tons of interviews with the various Pythons, all, you know, like bigging each other up and more often slagging each other off, and, you know, like, and Gilliam's tended to burnish his own mythology within that group as almost like the outsider of the outsider group, you know, which is being the American, being the kind of, you know, the relatively kind of bohemian one, I suppose, you know, compared to their sort of like quite straight backgrounds and things like that, you know.
Yeah.
But I think he enjoys that a lot. I certainly listened to him on this. But he was also talking. There was loads of stuff about Gilliam's earlier life that I didn't know, like about him, which again he may have exaggerated for comic purposes. Like, you know, he worked like in what we'd probably not tactfully now call like a freak show and stuff, like, where, you know, when he was a younger man.
Really? Does he mention that on the Desert Island Discs?
Yeah, no, he goes into it. Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah,
he
I'll have to
talks
listen
about how,
to that. I've never heard it. Yeah, what does he say?
Oh, it's just, I mean, it's just amazing. Like, he's just like saying, and of course, like I was hanging out with like the lizard man, and I was just like, all right, I can see how you might, and he also says he had a very churchy upbringing. I think Methodist, but like he.
I had heard that, yeah. So it was not like he wasn't. His parents weren't like bohemian or avant-garde in any way. They were quite straight-laced, and that's kind of like, so he was quite repressed.
Well, the way, I mean, again, he might be omitting quite a lot, but I think but I thought the story that I definitely was going to bring up for this was, because I think it's relevant to Time Bandits, is he said that he was going to become a missionary as a young man, and then he stopped being a missionary because he kept going to the meeting groups and the kind of prayer groups and stuff like that, and he kept making fun of religion and God, and they basically said, you can't do that. That's completely inappropriate. That's and he said something. At least this is the way he remembers it as an older man. He said something along the lines of like, what kind of a supreme being is it that can't take a joke about himself? It's like, yeah. And I was like, and then they said like, and then I walked out, like never looked back. It's kind of, and I was like, that is, if you're going to go back to Time Bandits, that is, which is all kind of like this very basic kind of cosmological reckoning with all that. It's kind of and a very destructive anarchic one. It's kind of, it's interesting that stuck with him.
A lot of the other Pythons, again, I've listened to Eric Idle's autobiography, like loads of them. They basically say like they will say Terry is not Terry without a fight. Basically, like he always needs someone to be fighting against in the production. He's very much a what's the word? He thrives, in conflict. Basically, he's not someone to. So that shows that he had that. Still had that same attitude when he was a kid.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It's really interesting. I didn't have this as a sort of prepared talking point or anything, but like, what you were saying before about like Monty Python's Flying Circus almost creating the idea of like being in Python land, like this kind of like, this world where these things happen in this kind of bizarre journey. I was just thinking like Time Bandits in some ways seems almost like, and oddly for sort of a your first really solid post Python project, or your second, depending on how you define it. It's like a kind of kid's fable, like Alice in Wonderland, isn't it? Where a kid is, you can almost say like Kevin, the protagonist of Time Bandits, he's like cast into Python land almost. Like that's kind of that is the sort of feel of it. It's like an epic Python, isn't it? Like it's kind of it's Python like as it will then define. And I think you said you were going to talk about meaning of life later. Like as it will define the big issues. Like you get to meet the person who's probably the devil in the Monty Python world, the person who's probably God in the Monty Python world,
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, there is a huge similarity between the obviously because you're dealing with the same person who did the production design for a lot of Flying Circus and obviously the movies, the Monty Python movies up to this point. So yeah, it really does feel that way. And what it would be like for Kevin as the straight man to be dropped into this bizarre world where like, but it's much more kind of like, I mean, they did talk about one time they wanted to do a sort of Python history of the world. A kind of that was what meaning of life was going to be at one point. It was going to be a sort of 7 ages of man sort of thing. They were going to obviously go to loads of different sort of scenarios. So. Yeah, I'm kind of glad that they did it through the Terry Gilliam lens, really, the Terry Gilliam lens alone, because I think that, it lends itself more to a Terry Gilliam film, the epic sort of, scale of it. But however, most of these characters that are so well drawn and so larger than life are really petty, like especially like the Napoleon character, like just have these super petty squibbles. That makes it like more funny.
Oh god, yeah. Well, the various guest characters and guest stars are just stellar, aren't they? Amazing.
Yeah.
But I mean, could you for our, because I do want to get a bit more into Time Bandits. We will take a break in the middle of this episode and come back to it. But I just want to talk. Could you give like I don't mean like a synopsis, but like could you give a sort of very basic summary of what Time Bandits is for people who've not seen it? Just what it's basically about.
It's a 1981 sort of fantasy epic, which is about a kid called Kevin who lives with his neglectful parents, and then one night when he's trying to sleep, how many dwarfs or we couldn't decide what the appropriate. What did Wikipedia say?
So we looked at Wikipedia, and Wikipedia describes the sort of main gang in this as dwarves. So we're gonna go with that.
Okay.
But yeah. But
Apologies if
they're
that's not the appropriate term, but like we
yeah,
we
I
mean no offense.
Yeah, as far as they're all actors of small stature, and they are not. I don't think they're referred to by any terminology like that in the film at all. But we're going to go with that. But,
we'll refer to them as the gang because there's a gang of them. And how many is there altogether?
I think there's 7 of them.
There's 7.
I remember famously, as it was it Gilliam himself has said, like they're kind of, at least in his head, they're kind of roughly modelled on the Monty Python troupe, which I think is. I'm sure I've read something where he's assigned roles to all of them, including the guy who is it Vermin who just eats everything.
That would make sense, yeah. But you think he would avoid?
That might be a self-portrait.
You think he would avoid doing having 7 dwarfs in the movie, like at all costs. But well, let's say.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know why this one stuck with me, but I'm pretty sure he said that Randall, the kind of self-absorbed, egotistical, bossy leader. I think that's meant to be a rough facsimile of John Cleese. I'm pretty sure he said.
And he's played by David Rappaport. Is that how you say his name?
David Rappaport. I'll come back to him because I think he's one of the standout performers in a movie that's not short of standout performers.
And he deserves an honourable mention because he's fantastic. So this group come out of his wardrobe, and they're all packing. They've got machine guns and tools and lamps, and they're sort of looking around, and then and they confront Kevin in his room, and they basically, as soon as they've met Kevin, they this huge, supreme being figure, huge face and angel-like light comes through the heavenly light comes through the wall opposite and chases them through like a time portal, and that's how it starts basically. And then it's an epical romp through time.
I love that in that barely within the first 10-12 minutes or something, you've got a machine gun let off in a kid's bedroom, and then they push the wall of his bedroom off. It's just kind of this sort of gleeful, destructive kind of energy that carries out through the rest of the movie.
That submachine gun blast last time I watched it made me cry laughing. There was just something about it, like you say, it was just so dangerous and so extreme. So,
it's just because he startles them, but it's just you could make that point just without the machine gun, but it's so much funnier. It's so dark you haven't seen that the gun's even there.
Yeah. And they basically are in the middle of murdering Kevin. Basically, when spoilers, when God shows up to sort of to chase them away. But they are literally let's get him. They're on top and they're smothering him with pillows. So they're not.
How narrative? Because I know they don't mention that it's the supreme being until a scene or two later. But how amazing is it that you introduce this gang of ne'er do wells, and within 2 minutes of meeting them, they're being chased out of a bedroom by God.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when you realise that there is, although it's in some ways a more conventional fantasy narrative, there is that kind of Gilliam animation-esque kind of chaos to it, isn't there? And there is that kind of through plot devices like time holes and these kind of dimension jumping antics, you kind of get some of that energy of the Python animations where it's just well, why not this then? Why not just this now because we want to do this? And it's just there's no real reason not to.
Exactly. You get the feeling that the actors are just his cutout paper that he's just kind of moving around at any cost. While we're on the bedroom sequence, I just have to mention this because there's an incredible documentary that came out in 2018 called The Accidental Studio, and again, for people who don't know, there was during the sort of early Python films, George Harrison and a bloke called what was his name now? I'm trying to think. Dennis O'Brien, who was Monty Python's manager, business manager. They basically created a film studio in which to make these movies, and it was called Handmade Films. And George Harrison, being the multi-trillionaire that he was, and just ludicrously successful, having been in the Beatles, stuff, financed a lot of these films with this bloke Dennis O'Brien. And so there's a story which made me laugh, again, made me cry laughing when I heard it, which was told by Michael Palin, who is the most incredibly kind of sincere and modest bloke, where he said that Terry Gilliam came round to his house one day and basically said, I've got this idea for a film and I want you to help me write it. And he said, right, well, we should probably go and see George and Dennis then, and we'll have a chat about it. So we got a meeting with George Harrison and Dennis O'Brien, the leads of Handmade Films, and went in. And Terry Gilliam had no manuscript, he had no script, he had no storyboards, he had nothing prepared, no photographs, nothing. And he went in and he basically said, so there's this boy and he's in bed, and then a knight in shining armour on a horse bursts out of his wardrobe. And George Harrison said, well, Dennis is trying to keep the money tight, but 12 million's there if you want it. That was it. And he said yes. And he greenlit it from that one statement. He didn't have anything. And then they had to go away and frantically write the film and get it done. True story. How amazing is that?
That is amazing. Yeah, I said I listened to that Desert Island Discs with Gilliam before. One of the records he picked, and as a overt thank you to George Harrison, was a Beatles record, and he actually picked Taxman, which is probably pretty ironic, given that I don't know what Terry Gilliam's finances have been like over the years, but that's.
You can imagine being George Harrison and just going through endless, post Beatles meetings about finance and shares and taxes and so on, and then just coming home and putting on Monty Python just to chill out a bit. That would have been his escape, probably, most likely.
Stranger Than Strange. Yes, that was a clip from a brand new film called The Time Bandits, and sitting beside me now is the man behind the film, Terry Gilliam, a little Tarquin. Listen, Terry, well, tell me a bit about The Time Bandits. What's it all about? Look very strange, falling into space.
No, you saw just the beginning there. That's the beginning of this amazing adventure of this 10-year-old boy and these 6 very tiny bandits who have stolen the map of all the holes in time and space.
Yes.
And they've set out on a life of crime, you see, to rob in one century, escape century before the crime, and get away with it.
Yes.
They formerly worked for the Supreme Being, or God, as you and I know him.
Yes.
And the working conditions were less than brilliant, pay was low. And they decided, paradise wasn't really the best place to spend the rest of eternity, so let's go out and get the cash. That's what they went for.
Well, that seems like a lot of laughs, a lot of fun. Where did the idea come from?
Desperation, basically. Desperation.
Nobody knows.
I was broke. I had to think of something fast.
Listen, they kidnap a schoolboy, don't they, to take away with them?
Yes, who,
Schoolboy
surprisingly enough,
is
sitting
next
to
me. It's Craig Warnock. Give him a cheer. Here it is. Craig. Now, Craig, listen, how did you get chosen for the part?
Well, I went out with my brother to the audition, and I wasn't really going to go for it because I thought I was too tall. So, when my brother went in, I thought I might as well go.
Well, that's great. Listen, what was the craziest thing that you...
Tell him about the end, OK?
What's the craziest thing you had to do? Who was that? What was the craziest thing you had to do in the film?
Probably fighting in mud, under gallons of mud.
Under gallons of mud?
Yes.
You got a little bit dirty. How does the film end, the whole thing? How does
Don't tell him about the ending! You mustn't tell him about the ending.
Here they are, the Time Bandits!
About the ending, but it's a surprise. And, well, we know...
Get on it! Listen!
Don't tell him about the
Don't tell him about the ending!
Listen!
No!
Fellas!
Don't tell him about the ending!
Fellas, listen!
You must never...
Listen!
What about the ending?
Are you...
No ending, but this film goes on forever, doesn't it?
Listen, I hardly dare ask, but are you as crazy as you... or as wicked as you appear to be in the film?
No, we're bank clerks, you know, a real job. Bank clerk.
Listen, I mean, was it a difficult film to make? Is it exciting?
No, it was a cinch.
And it's not very exciting?
No, it's not exciting.
He's son of Superman.
What's it got going for it?
Oh, it's a very good film. Very good film, it's very good.
What will people enjoy about it?
Oh, the whole thing.
Yeah.
The ending. The ending's really
Oh,
nice.
What happens at the end?
Have
Well, I'd
we
like
got
to-
an ending?
Yeah, the
Craig,
end.
tell me how does it end? Tell us a little bit about the ending.
Well, look...
Next. Listen, take a look at the ending. This is a bit from the end.
The budget is so... It's one of those movies like, it's so impossible to tell what the budget of the movie was because it uses it all so effectively that even the bits that kind of almost... Firstly, fessing up, I'm too close to this movie. I realizing I rewatched this for this podcast, and I realized it was really fun rewatching it. But in a way, out of everything we've done for this podcast, I think it was less necessary of a rewatch because almost every line, sometimes right down to the line readings and styles and intonations of this movie, is imprinted on me. And I think I must have watched this movie like realistically, like, I don't know, 40 times or something. It's...
I omit it sometimes from my, when people say, what's the film you've watched the most? I usually say Terminator 2, Mrs. Doubtfire, Aliens, Independence Day, actually, which I watched recently, watched just a couple of nights ago, actually, which I remember thinking, God, I used to watch this a lot when I was a kid. By the way, the first 45 minutes of Independence Day are, I think, absolute genius, especially on this rewatch. Like, because when you're a kid, you just watch these films, you don't really care too much about it. You certainly don't analyse it to any degree. But the character building, and I cared as soon as by the time that Jeff Goldblum opens his laptop on Air Force One and says "Time's up," I cared about every single person in the film. Do you know what I mean? And I wanted them to live. That's not easy to do. Especially in like a big stupid action movie like that. It's
a good disaster movie, isn't it? Because it does take a bit more time with, as far as I remember, it's been a while for me, but like it does take a bit more time with the characters, even if they're fairly basic characters.
Yeah, they really, really do. And the mixture of great CGI and model work. There's so much model work in it. So all of there was not one shot in the film where I went, "Oh, that looks a bit ropey." It all looks fucking brilliant. It looks so much better than the sequel. I put on the sequel straight after. I turned it off after 15 minutes. The CGI was disgusting.
It's funny, disgusting, abhorrent. Yeah. It's funny. You get that thing with. We talked about Terminator before. You get that thing with Independence Day as well, where the great thing is you mentioned the first 45 minutes. Partly it's so good because it is all build up, isn't it? Like it's not just character building and world building, but it's all that thing of what the hell's going to happen. And obviously, if you've seen a single poster for it, you kind of know the kind of thing that's going to happen.
Yeah,
but,
it's all exactly. It's all suspense, and the score. If you think about the score, is literally going from 0 to 10 over 45 minutes, and it's building and building and building. It's actually like it deserves a lot of credit. That film, I think it's wonderful, and I'm a huge Jeff Goldblum fan anyway, so that's half the work done.
Yeah, it's no Mars Attacks.
It's true. Did it come out the same year? Come to think of it,
I think Mars Attacks was like a year later, maybe, or something.
So like Independence Day was like 96, and like Mars Attacks 97, something like that.
I think something like that. I'm going to say, yeah.
Oh, okay,
but like I don't know. But it's
crazy.
Just, I'm just thinking about the build-up. I'm just thinking about getting to the Martians and the dove taking off and everything.
And there's Pierce Brosnan's head talking to that actor from.
Sarah Jessica Parker, isn't it?
That's the one. Yeah. I've actually fallen for you quite a bit. Remember that line? That's like
underrated comic actor.
I won't lie to you. I've never really got Mars Attacks. Like I understand it's meant to be funny, but I never really. I don't know. It never quite landed with me. That one.
How could you put down a film where at the end Danny DeVito and Tom Jones are singing along to It's Not Unusual? Honestly,
on a mountainside. Yeah. To be fair, in the Nevada desert. All right, okay, I take it back.
Anyway, Time Bandits. So I was watching it this time, because it is that sort of history travelogue, isn't it? And you do have the segment, where shortly after that initial flight from the Supreme Being, they, Kevin discovers that they're meant to be, they've decided to steal this map of the universe and steal things with it, get rich. And they encounter Napoleon, played by Ian Holm. They encounter Robin Hood and his merry men, and Robin Hood's played by John Cleese.
That's my favourite scene in the whole thing, when it's just when Robin Hood's merry men are like the most ruthless band of thugs that basically gift poor people with an expensive article like a gold cup and then smack them in the face. Whether they're man, woman or child, and it for some reason that makes me laugh so much because it's so pointless and like it doesn't mean anything. It's just it is what it is. It's just violence for the sake of violence, and that's very, very Terry Gilliam, I think.
Well, it's that amazing thing, isn't it? Of because John Cleese in it that is playing Robin Hood as kind of like sort of minor royal, essentially, like one of those like royals who opens like fates and stuff. How are you? You're poor, are you? Jolly good. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Sort of Prince Charles.
It's the idea of him being the aristocratic public relations guy at the head of this organisation that's just this massive pillaging mob. It's just this brutal kind of organisation. It's just amazing. That's the kind of that could fuel a whole film.
Yeah, that's the whole
that's
film.
Fueled weaker films have been fueled than that,
I know what you mean, and the moment where he turns to the most ruthless of his men and says, "Marion, could you take this?" Oh man,
it's amazing.
Hello, I'm Hood.
It's Robin Hood.
Say good morning, you scum!
Good morning. You're all robbers.
The best, Mr. Hood.
Jolly good. And you're a robber, are you? Jolly good. And do you enjoy robbing then?
Well, it helps pay the rent, sir.
Jolly good. And you're a robber too, are you? How long have you been a robber?
4'1".
Good Lord. Jolly good. 4'1".
Yes.
Well, that is a long time, isn't it? Well, now, I hear you've made a pretty good haul.
Well, see for yourself, sir.
I say. Cracky. I mean, I've been in robbing for years, but I've never seen anything like this. Crumbs. And you acquired all this by yourselves?
Well, it was a good day, Mr. Hood.
Jolly good day.
It's nice, isn't it?
Rather. Well, I mean, what can I say? Thank you all very, very much indeed.
Oh, don't make... What?
Well, I mean, it's frightfully kind of you. The poor are going to be absolutely thrilled. Have you met them at all?
Who?
The poor?
The poor?
Oh, you must meet them. I just know you'll like them. Charming people. Of course, they haven't got 2 pennies to rub together, but that's because they're poor.
We should talk about the map as well, the map of time that they've stolen from the Supreme Being, they call him, they don't refer to him as God, it's basically almost like a blueprint map, isn't it? And it's meant to show the places in the universe that are torn, like the space-time is torn so that they can go through, which is the portals.
Yeah, because the universe was created in a rush job over 7 days.
Yeah,
Bit of a botched job, Randall describes it as.
Yeah. We thought that I didn't clock for, it's almost like I'd heard of the joke for the first time, but on the last time I watched it, they talk about, was it Fidget creating the pink bunkadoo? Like the tree.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what's he say? Like, 10 stories tall, bright orange, and smelt terrible.
That's like the nearest to a calling card that one of them has.
Yeah, beautiful tree that was. Yeah.
Yeah. All these things that were just too wrong for creation. It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, no, that map is a lovely piece of design, isn't it? And it's iconic, and it's used. Well, I think it's used over the opening, or at least the style is used over the opening and the closing credits. I meant to talk to you about those opening credits, by the way, as well. I was rewatching it, and the first sort of 25, 30 seconds of it, the music, which is there's a bit like synths coming into play and everything like it does sound a bit Vangelis. Like it's almost like I was thinking that just because I was thinking about movies that came out around the same time, and obviously you've got Blade Runner coming out I think the year afterwards, and it's and it was almost like I was watching because I was putting it on while I was putting the kettle on, and I just heard it and I was like, have I put Blade Runner on by mistake? And it was then it's
you're totally right, and like I'm just googling now just to see who actually did the score. Have you got any idea?
No, you know what? I'll look it up and we'll insert it seamlessly. It was a really nice mood setter. The music was made by someone called Mike Moran. With of course some songs by George Harrison as well. You've got that. Is it called Only a Dream Away? The song that plays
Dream
at the
Away,
end credits.
is it RANIA? Yeah, it's that's I love that song. Like I've got that on my playlist actually. I listen to that a lot just because it's so joyous and like wonderful. But knowing what you know now about George Harrison and how he how integral he was to the film being made, it makes it all the better. And the song is about it's essentially about Time Bandits, isn't it? It really is the theme of the film. Like if you listen to the lyrics, it's superb. It's a great song.
One actor that I love seeing in this, who we would have been less enthusiastic as kids, but is now great, is Ian Holm, because we wouldn't have quite seen Alien yet when we were first kind of really into this, So it's kind of like now it's obviously he's done a lot more than Alien, but now it's Ian Holm from Alien, it's Ian Holm from The Madness of King George, it's Ian Holm from Fellowship of the Ring.
The more I think about Ian Holm, the more I think he's one of the best actors that lived. He passed away now, hasn't he? I think. Yeah,
he has. Yeah,
I think he's one of the best actors ever. If you think about the role of Ash in Alien and the opening to The Lord of the Rings, I just believe him. I completely believe him in every role. There's especially as Ash in Alien, he's so naturalistic the way he acts in that. When he's sort of having to go at Parker saying like you need to follow these directives, otherwise you're not going to get your shares, and stuff like that. There's nothing about him that makes me think you're acting. He's just wonderful. He's amazing, man. He's amazing, and this is a way more outlandish performance, obviously, in this. It's Napoleon.
Yeah, I think he manages to come off as almost like he's like actually both ludicrous and kind of threatening as Napoleon. Like he's kind of like it's almost like quite a realistic, well, not realistic, but kind of like this almost comically believable portrayal of Napoleon.
I remember that you're absolutely right, because I remember especially as a kid watching that scene, I thought heads are going to roll for this. I remember thinking people are going to die, like people are going to get shot in a minute. I was scared of him. I did think, because he's a great actor. Now it's ridiculous when you look back at it. But I love they pointed out on the Rule of Three podcast as well. He says, "I'm going to have some new generals for a bit, just for a bit."
Yeah, no, there's so many odd turns of phrase and kind of weird lines in this movie that some which are just imprinted on me. I deliberately want to talk about. We'll break shortly, but I deliberately sort of want to talk to you before we start talking about Evil or anything to do with David Warner.
Oh, David Warner deserves his own section. Yeah.
We'll leave that as kind of a segment, but we'll talk about the historical periods first. But just before we moved on, I just wanted to let you talk about the bit where the gang has to. Well, they don't have to, but they decide to do the Me and My Shadow show.
Oh my god, that's got to be one of the best scenes in cinema history. So they're trying to they get stuck in the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon is watching a sort of Punch and Judy show, isn't he? That then I never quite understood. Do you think that the puppeteer gets shot by a stray bullet from the war? Is that what it is?
I think
basically?
that's what's meant to happen. Yeah,
it's ricocheted, so they get shot. So anyway, they need some. Napoleon's angry, so they need to get on the stage and get the show on the road as soon as possible. And so the dwarfs hand music to the band at the front. Somehow they've got the Me and My Shadow
sheet music of Me and My Shadow
from somewhere in the.
That's something they packed. Yeah,
and then you got those crappy bugle sound and stuff. And they go out and they do the show, and it's the worst performance of anything ever. And they end up just having a massive brawl on stage, and it's an amazing scene, and and then obviously Napoleon ends up thinking it's there's that double, there's that sort of bait and switch where you think Napoleon's going to kill them, and then it turns out he thought it was the best thing he's ever seen, and then he makes them his generals for a bit.
Yeah, would you like to? Because I might as well stick stuff in the show notes while we're doing it. But would you like to tell people how you repurposed that scene for a YouTube video?
Yeah, so Game of Thrones fans, I thought years ago we were watching the Purple Wedding. And there was some dwarf entertainers came out, didn't they, at the Purple Wedding under Joffrey's, and to reenact was great?
This is season 4 of Game of Thrones. So this is this would be 2014, I think.
So he says when Joffrey's introducing them, he says, "My lords, my ladies." I just inserted that scene as if and then put it as if all the characters are watching that happen. It worked pretty seamlessly.
Yeah. So I remember Sansa's horrified, zooming in on Sansa's horrified face.
Yeah, and then everyone claps at the end. Yeah. No, I thought that was
I'm definitely tracking that down and putting a link to it. That's
probably...
one of the proud in terms of stuff I'm proud for you for putting on the internet. That's definitely top 3.
Well, that was one of those things where we were talking about it. Wouldn't it be funny if somebody did this, and then I just had a free afternoon, back when I had free time, and I just I just did that. Yeah, no, it's a brilliant, so funny,
masterwork. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about we'll talk about many things, but we'll talk about the force of nature that is David Warner.
Oh yes.
Like the wallpaper sticks to the wall, like the seashore sticks to the sea. Like you never get your shadow, boy. You never get your me. And my shadow strolling down the avenue, me and my shadow. Together and when it's 12 o'clock, we climb the stairs. We never knock. Nobody's around. I'll take this to
I wanted to talk to you a bit about the kind of weirdly melancholy, quite haunting, I think, bit in the movie where Kevin ends up. It's when they flee the Supreme Being and catches up with them again. They're in the forest after they've run into Robin Hood's men, and then Kevin ends up in the time hole. Basically, he runs the 2 portals open and he runs into the wrong one, and there's this whole segment where he plummets to the ground and accidentally stuns the Minotaur long enough for, it turns out, King Agamemnon to kill it, and King Agamemnon takes off his helmet and is Sean Connery.
Yes. Did you hear the story about the scripts of that, where it said,
I think so, but you tell it. Yeah.
Before they'd cast the film, they would written the script, and they'd written he takes his helmet off to reveal Sean Connery or an actor of equal stature. Just getting, but they ended up getting Sean Connery, which is great.
Yeah, well, that Minotaur is terrifying as well. I remember that particularly as like a sort of 6-year-old kid or whatever. I was just like that you know, obviously I presume it's a tall actor, but they shoot him from below as well, and it's just like he's making those horrible kind of. It's very Jabberwocky actually, that bit. Yeah, it's like, you know, the sort of horrible guttural sounds and roars and squeals and stuff, and it's like, you know,
the fact that you kind of look at it and you're like, is it a helmet or is it an actual creature? You know, is it like there and it's got like blood dripping out the side of its thing? It reminds me a bit of the crocodile in Hook. You know, the way that it's clearly dead, but it's not dead. You know, that's incredibly creepy to me as well. Just the kind of sort of taxidermied thing that's still actually living. It's a great design.
I think Terry Gilliam's just not able to shoot those, because that could be quite a generic fight scene that he interrupts, but Terry Gilliam is just not able. He's unable to not make those things like weirdly, memorably grotesque. You know, it's a weirdly nightmarish scene. That
it's really slow as well, isn't it? Like, you know, you really get the weight of the weapons, like throwing them around, you know, like that sort of thing. The fact that this fight is just going on as well, like you don't know what the context is or anything at the time.
Yeah,
and doesn't he?
I think for a kids' movie, there's a real. I will come back to this actually, but there's a real sense of physical threat in this in general. You know, not like towards Kevin in, you know, as the protagonist, but just people. You really get the sense that people could get hurt here, and quite a lot of people do. You know,
I'm so glad that they do, and it's the same in the greatest kids movies. Really, things like the films like Willow and, you know, obviously Legend, Labyrinth, but also Where the Wild Things Are as well. You know, like, you know, that's what made that film so great, is you really feel like the kid is in, you know, physical danger. You know, so when he succeeds or, you know, whatever, it's like, you know, you really feel like they've dodged a bullet. You know, if there's not that threat there, then why should you care? You know.
Well, the whole scene, that whole sequence of, like, you know, I think it can't be more than 15 minutes of the movie, but, you know, at the time as a kid, it felt like a long bit of the movie. Was it goes through so many moods, doesn't it? Because you've got you know, Kevin feels threatened and the city's quite spooky, and, you know, there's these like rituals and stuff that seem strange to him, but then also King Agamemnon turns out to be a really nice bloke and turns out to be really, you know, empathetic, and like he's into magic and stuff like that, you know, and he's kind of like, you know, obviously we barely even talked about Kevin's like parents at the beginning. We'll sort of return to those at the end maybe, but because of the way the movie ends, but like he's kind of a father figure that seems that Kevin's not really, you know, not really had someone to look up to yet and everything like that. And then you get the scene, you know, you basically set up this sort of like parallel life for Kevin.
Yeah.
And I was actually, you know, this has only just occurred to me, but it's a little bit, in a strange way, it's a little bit like the bit in Life of Brian where they go off on the space adventure. You know, there's just a bit. There's a bit in the movie where a whole right turn is taken. You're presented like this, almost like this parallel adventure movie, where just a really wholesome thing where this like modern kid goes to live with King Agamemnon for like a whole movie, and then it's just snatched away from you.
I genuinely, again, spoilers for the end of the movie, but I thought he was going to end up back there. I remember thinking, like, you know, he's going to get back to that, you know, and he's going to live happily ever after. Part of me is glad they didn't do that, because I like the fact it's such an obscure, strange ending to the movie and so unresolved. But but yeah, no, it is. You feel good for him. You feel like he's found like this environment that he's going to thrive. Starts off incredibly threatening, like you said, and really strange, and it turns into like a really, you know, great place. And then you think, you know, but also, I mean, imagine watching that again for the first time and thinking, where's this going? Like, what's going to happen here? You know, I don't remember thinking that the bandits were going to show up really, and then they do. They in that magic show.
Yeah, well, they show up gloriously, don't they? Yeah, because of the party's underway, and you're all having a good time with the party, and then they get en masse and stuff. And it's kind of, but they're still really in control of the situation, and the music's, you know, in control of the situation. And it's.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but their reason for saving him is simply because they care about him and they think he's in peril.
I think it's because they.
Or do they need him for something? Do they need him?
I don't think they need him for something specific, but they definitely want him along as part of the gang. You know,
they think he's a valuable member of the gang. Yeah.
Well, don't they talk about it's like they say he's like really clever and he's taller than any of us. Like,
yeah.
He's kind of like, you know, he's almost like the muscle. You know, like it's kind of like, you know,
the line that made me laugh in, you know, especially when I was a kid, was they're doing a cheers after they've done a robbery, and they go, "Cheers, here's to stinking rich," and he goes, "And to Kevin." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, and here's to Kevin. Yeah, stinking Kevin."
That's right. Yeah,
just made me laugh.
You got the little rituals and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't actually mention that one of the actors is Kenny Baker, right?
Yes, yeah, the Star Wars connection there, yeah, which is crazy. Yeah. So Jedi hadn't been out, was not out yet. So I suppose
would this have been the year after Empire? I guess.
Yeah. So I assume that he was. I think that he was in Jedi as well. Was obviously as R2, but I think he might have played an Ewok as well. We've got a feeling alongside Warwick Davis.
Might have done double duty, yeah. But I mean, I suppose Kenny Baker's one of those weird actors who he shows up in something, and in a weird way, he's one of the most famous actors in the world. For that generation of movies,
he's usually masked, but this is a great role for him, really, because it's one of the only roles that he's done where you can actually see his face. He's really funny in it. I mean, most of the actors in the gang are really funny actually as well. I really wanted to, we talk about David Rappaport, who plays Randall before, who's obviously we need to talk about him actually. We need to talk about David Rappaport because I think that he deserves some attention.
Yeah, no, we should. I was going to highlight him and the actor who plays Wally. Because Wally's the kind of bearded dwarf, who's gets some incredible scenes of not only capability and kind of anger and frustration with Randall amusingly, but also just the scene where we'll skip ahead a little bit where Fidget dies in the sort of action climax, where Wally loses his shit about it, and it's weirdly it's weirdly seriously emotional.
Yeah,
and not just emotional, but he's furious. It's kind of like proper adult emotion. Yeah,
and he's going towards evil, and he's literally he's putting the whole gang at risk. And that I really felt that emotionally as a kid, and I really thought Fidget was dead. I remember feeling that. That was and that's all through performance.
Yeah.
Just because you believe it's like, again, suspension of disbelief. It's just, that's all it is.
I think it's built up cleverly as well, because in that previous action scene when they're escaping from the cages, you briefly think that Wally's dead as well. So it's kind of but then that's overcome quickly. So it's that idea of permanent physical threat, isn't it? And all these characters are very aware that they're very vulnerable. Oh,
I love that cage scene. How fascinating is that? That the way that's shot is just. That's an incredible piece of practical, effects work, and just a really tense sequence as well.
It's so tense, and it's partly so effective because of all the sound design, isn't it? Because you really believe that huge void they're in is the clanking chains and the squeak of everything, and the fact that they are just poised above this God knows how deep pit and everything. It's just it's a weirdly tense action sequence, isn't it? It sounds weird for a movie like this,
And the physics of it kind of make perfect sense as well. It feels like it could be done, in a lot of ways. And the cutting, when he's cut the. Instead of taking it off in long strips, he's just cut that tiny bit left. But
that's an amazing sight gag, isn't it? That's like something for a Wile E. Coyote cartoon.
Yeah, finished. Yeah, put the knife down. But no, David Rappaport, I think it's a real tragedy because he ended up he had a few more notable roles after Time Bandits, but then ended up committing suicide in the late 80s, I think. Would it be, Dave? What would it?
Well, it was definitely the late 80s, because that's of course the thing I heard years and years later was that he not only was about to be in a Star Trek: The Next Generation episode in Series 3. So this would have been eventually broadcast in 89, so it probably would have been filmed in 88, 89.
Yeah.
But he was, for Star Trek fans, it was the episode that became the most toys, by the way, which I really liked that episode. But he actually had filmed scenes for it as well. They had got through the bulk of the filming schedule, and then
you can see that footage.
His demons caught up with him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad because he's just brilliant. He's such a fantastic actor. He carries this whole film. It wouldn't work if you didn't believe the head of the gang and his motives. It wouldn't work. And the sequence on the Titanic where he's talking to Kevin and burning his hair with a cigar by accident, and it's just genius. It's so funny. And yeah.
Well, one of the great things about as I say, Randall and Wally have kind of the most, you might say, adult roles in it. But one of the great things about making the whole troupe of little people is you have that thing, don't you, where in some films, it's still quite common now where the disabled actor, if they're in the film at all, is incredibly virtuous, because all the filmmakers are trying to show that disabled people can be virtuous and lovely and are to be respected and everything. But in this film is kind of, there's obviously the grotesquerie of the old carnival show to it. We've already talked about the me and my shadow scene and everything like that. There's that to it. But there's also just the fact that if you have this many actors of small stature in it, you can portray that the spectrum of characters there, and they all have different personalities, they all have different characters, and Randall is an egotistical, manipulative bully, and Wally is very headstrong and proud, and they just have these different things. It's great.
This is it, yeah. When you have minority groups portrayed, it's great to portray them, as all people. It's not, you don't have to pander to people with disabilities like that. You just have to give them the same opportunities and the same chances. And I think this film, really does justice to that. And again to David Rappaport, rest in peace, man. What a genius.
Yeah. No, R.I.P. him. Yeah. So I just wanted to talk to you. Well, we've got kind of quite a few things about the film. Really, I want to talk about where to stop really with this, but. This was definitely my introduction to David Warner, or rather, it was probably joint introduction with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: The Secret of the Ooze.
Oh, I think we probably watched Secret of the Ooze first. I don't know actually. It's a difficult one. Yeah. Did we have Time Bandits on VHS, like recorded off TV, or can you remember?
I think that was how we had it. Yeah.
Because, but I think Teenage Mutant. I feel like Secret of the Ooze might have come first. Although having said that, I can't imagine our house never having Time Bandits in it. You know what I mean? It must have been there from the start, so who knows? Neck and neck, I suppose.
For anyone who doesn't know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: The Secret of the Ooze is one of me and Matt's favourite childhood movies as well. Maybe not one quite as easy to do a full podcast about, but it's
in no small part due to the performance of David Warner as well, an actor who we actually had the pleasure of meeting in 2011. Which was just one of, and as a horror fan as well, for people who don't follow horror films as much, he was a main character in the Omen movie, which and he has one of the best on-screen deaths of anyone in any movie. So getting to talk to him about that, he was at a signing desk at a Star Trek convention that me and David went to.
Yeah.
And it
was 2012 actually.
Oh, sorry, 2012.
It was 2012. Yeah.
Only 9 years ago.
Yeah. Well, he done his. Do you remember he'd done his? He was in one of the Matt Smith series of Doctor Who, and when we saw him, he'd filmed that, but it wasn't out yet.
Oh, I wouldn't know that. Yeah, I don't follow the Who.
Yeah, no, he was in a Matt Smith episode of Doctor Who where he played like a Russian submarine like bosun or something like it. It's kind of, with like no accent.
He played a Russian submarine.
Yeah. But
he's pretty versatile.
Well, of course, the reason we saw him was we were at a Star Trek convention that you kindly got me tickets for, and that was, I also knew him as quite an early childhood experience, in his quite iconic roles in Star Trek, especially Chancellor Gorkon in Star Trek 6, I mean, he's been in just so much good stuff.
It was amazing to talk to, and that's why I said to him, I said, like, dude, you were in Titanic, and I said that's one of the biggest films ever made, and he said, well, one of the biggest, but certainly not the best. And I just thought that was so modest, like the way he talked about it. And he had nothing but good things to say about Leo, which was cool.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, lovely man. And still, I think occasionally acting as we speak. Like, I mean, he's this is 2021. I think he's in his mid-80s now, I think, but he still crops up and stuff.
One of his last big gigs was Mary Poppins Returns. He played the admiral who sits on the roof of his house, on Cherry Tree Lane, and fires the cannon off. And of course, and the person, it's just a great double bill, because like partnership, because you've got David Warner playing the admiral, and then his bosun is played by the actor who plays Bishop Brennan in Father Ted, which is just amazing. So just a great double act there, and noticed him straight away. How could I not?
Yeah. But I mean, how amazing is he as evil in this? Because he, for anyone who hasn't seen Time Bandits, he's basically playing this universe's Satan essentially, and he's like, it's just this. It's the marriage of his performance with that outfit, like that sort of weird kind of half pantomime, half like Geiger-esque kind of biomechanical, like tube helmet thing he's wearing, isn't it? Like,
it is very Geiger-esque now you mention it, with the sort of the clawed skeletal hand that's like cupping his hair, and then like the long red robe on it, and it's, I mean, a lot, and he has sort of does he have like long claw-like fingers as well? Does he have long yellow fingernails? A lot of people, I listened to this great podcast by Brett Goldstein, and it's called Movies to be Buried With, and it basically asks them the same questions: what's your favourite movie, so on, to different celebrities, and a lot of them have actually said Evil in Time Bandits is one of the things that scared them the most.
Interesting,
and it's weird because, I mean, don't get me wrong, he's a very intimidating screen presence, and the character is frightening, but he was so funny. It sort of balanced my, it's like that wonderful sweet spot, whereas it's too funny to be scary, it's too scary to be funny. When you were a kid, that American Werewolf vibe.
It's just watching it this time, there was so many lines that made me laugh, and I was just remembering the exact intonation. Like there's ones that are set up as like the actual laugh moments, like when he incinerates all his henchmen just to show that he can, and then just says, "I'm a reasonable man." But one of the other bits that just, I don't know why it cracks me up as much as it does, is when he's like shortly after that when he's he's in the fight where he's controlling the tank and the sort of moon laser thing at the same time, and they're like he's controlling the. We thought we were in control. He's like, no, of course you don't, you stupid little man. I control them. It's just like they've just misread the instructions, to the universe. It's just like
one of my favourite moments ever is when he's already exploded like 2 of his henchmen, and the other one sort of walks in from the background and says, "But why, if that's the case, are you unable to escape from this fortress?" Then he's boom, he blows up and he goes, "It's a good question."
you know what that is? That's a proper Danny DeVito in Batman Returns moment. No, it's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This 10 years later. So yeah, this owes a lot. The Batman owes a lot.
But that's a good question. Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean,
Evil existed long before good. I made myself. I cannot be unmade. I am all powerful.
Why, if that's the case, are you unable to escape from this fortress?
It's a good question. Why have I let the Supreme Being keep me here in the fortress of ultimate darkness? Because you... Oh, shut up. I'm speaking rhetorically.
Oh, of course.
I let him keep me here in order to lull him into a false sense of security.
Ah, clever. Clever.
When I have the map, I will be free, and the world will be different, because I have understanding.
Understanding of what, Master?
Digital watches. And soon I shall have understanding of video cassette recorders and car telephones. And when I have understanding of them, I shall have understanding of computers. And when I have understanding of computers, I shall be the Supreme Being. God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the Silicon Revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Slugs.
Slugs? He created slugs. They can't hear, they can't speak, they can't operate machinery. I mean, are we not in the hands of a lunatic?
Sir, look!
If I were creating a world, I wouldn't mess about with butterflies and daffodils. I would have started with lasers. 8 o'clock, day 1. Sorry.
I mean, even just the lines he sells are just ridiculous. But you feel like he's added if they've already up to 11, he's maybe got them up to 13. Like when he aims his claws at the pool, he's just like, "Stand by for mind control." Yeah. It's almost like everyone's just looking at him like, was he meant to do that?
It's just dialed up. Like, where was he when this was happening? Like, but no, it's brilliant. It's so good, and the costume. You've got his henchmen that are all wrapped in. What do you call that stuff? It's kind of like PVC. It's not PVC. What's it called? The see-through plastic, basically. Oh, yeah. The sort of Rain Mac plastic stuff.
Which comes back, doesn't it, in... is it 12 Monkeys? Like the glimpses you see of the future sort of dystopia in that, before Bruce Willis is sent back.
It's also Blade Runner as well, isn't it? Like one of the characters is wearing that raincoat that's like sort of see-through plastic. So I guess they kind of thought it was futuristic. But in this, I don't know if you noticed, but all of Kevin's furniture, at his parents' house is wrapped in plastic. So it's kind of like, it is a nod. Also, I'm sure you've noticed that all of the stuff that's in the movie is in Kevin's bedroom at the beginning, all the Lego pieces and the starship and everything. So is it a dream? Yeah. Who knows?
I think you pointed that out to me. Yeah, it's got that great kind of like fig leaf to was it a dream? Which we'll come back when we talk about the ending as well. But I actually, it's interesting, isn't it?
And the answer is no, it wasn't.
It's basically brutally so in a sort of very Roald Dahl way. I love the way that Kevin's parents show up at the scene where they're first enticed into the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness, and it's that kind of almost like the glossy game show as like Spider's Trap almost, because it's really spooky, that bit, because that's the bit we were talking about this. I texted you when I was watching. I was just like, Jim Broadbent's in this, and I was like, because he's the game show host at the beginning when Kevin's parents are watching TV, but then he comes back as essentially evil in disguise, there, and it's
yes, and that look that he gives when he says the map, please. And he's got his hands. It is terrifying. That is like one of the scariest
really
looks,
terrifying.
And then he transforms, doesn't he? And the creatures, the things that genuinely scared me in this film, that's one of them. Like that sequence So yeah, that always just creeped me out, the way they sort of transform back into evil and stuff. But evil's soldiers, the skeletal soldiers that are huge things with that, and they have like one claw, white bone claw, and they shoot rockets out of their eyes. And it's just the design in this stuff. I mean, you know, it's just incredible. They are really, really scary. Like those things that run after Kevin.
Well, and again, the sound effects though, like the sort of screeching that they make, which is kind of like a little bit bird-like. It actually, you know what? It sounds like they've taken little bits of like Hitchcock's stuff from the Birds and just like filtered it or something. You know, it's kind of like, you know, it's
sort of electronically altered bird calls, and stuff like that. That shouldn't be made from that skull. You know, it doesn't belong there at all. It's I mean, it's really scary. So, you know, you were asking me before about when I'm going to show Luca these movies. You know, it's one of those things I'll probably stick it on. You know, like when he's like 4.5, 5 or something, and then gets to scenes like that and think, oh, this is probably a bad idea. But that's that's the way that's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess.
Well, there's loads of really relatable stuff in it, you know, like Kevin as a child protagonist and things like that, you know, and the dwarves are like appealing characters. But yeah, there's so much terror in it, and you know, I mean, you know, I think we've talked about this before, and we're on roughly the same page. You know, I don't think it's a bad thing to expose kids to things that scare them in general, because I think that's something that everyone has to filter in and everyone has to work through. And, you know, as long as you're not going to land them in like therapy, you know, innately for it and stuff like that, you know, that's...
You never know. Oh, so this is the problem with kids. You never know what's going to scare them. Like, you know, for some reason, Luca's developed a fear of cobwebs. And I don't think he's ever seen a cobweb in his life, you know, but he must have seen it on one of the little kids things, you know, talking about Incy Wincy Spider or something, you know. So you just never know, like, you know, what's going to scare people. So you can't, there's no point trying to protect them. I mean, to an extent, obviously, I'm not going to go out and show him, like, you know, Martyrs or anything anytime soon.
No, that's next year.
Yeah.
It's you know, one bit that used to really scare me in this, and this is similar to how creeped out I was by the Cosgrove Hall BFG adaptation, is you know, the bit in this is a little bit earlier than before they get to the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness, but they're in the Time of Legends, you know, when they're in that ship that they've stolen off the ogre. We'll talk about that in a minute, but when they land on they inadvertently realize they're on a giant's head, and the giant, you know, stands up and basically is wearing them as a hat as it walks out of the sea, and that shot of the giant walking out of the, you know, in the background, in the far distance, walking out of the sea, it's just humongous, you know, like hundreds and hundreds of feet high, and it's terror. And you see the like little villagers like running around in the foreground. I just found that really, really nightmarish. You know, that sort of scale and everything I found really terrifying. And like, you know, that again, you were saying like the use of slow motion effects and things like that in that to convey scale and sort of grandeur, you know.
I'm sorry to do this to you because this is just going to make this even worse, but I saw a 4K or Blu-ray HD print of the film where it's twice as clear as it's ever been, and those villagers in the foreground of that shot you're talking about are the elephant, you know, master, you know, from what's it called, from The Meaning of Life, you know, the elephant sort of like character that's in that, you know, it's in his trunk. That's what that sort of absurdly large trunk, you know, and like things flapping around going blah, 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 in the foreground, and there's like a baby crying, so the baby gets stood on and murdered, basically, and it's horrible. And then always them stabbing the needle into the giant's head got me a bit as a kid, because it's just flesh and bone and just
it's nasty.
It's I mean, I can see why they were worried when they'd finished production on this, that it had fallen between a few too many stools, you know, like when they made it, and I can see why. But some of the movies that came out of the 80s, you know, the so-called family movies, like, you know, The Goonies, Poltergeist, things like that, you know, just that's why they're so brilliant, because it's just like I don't know, it's just like they didn't give a fuck about who the audience was, and for some reason that created great art. I don't know why.
Well, I think there's a bit just shortly after that, you know, when they discover the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness, that I think should be one of those like iconic shots of movies of the 80s things, which is where, you know, the dwarfs have been squabbling, and then they throw, one of them throws, is it Wally, like throws a skull basically at Randall, but from the camera's perspective, he's throwing it directly at the camera, and the force field, you know, the illusion that's covering the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness shatters, so it's like the screen is shattering in front of you.
Yeah, that's a really great shot. And then the reverse of that, when they turn the camera around and you see the dark, you know, sort of Castle Dracula, you know, amongst the thing with all the broken shards of glass. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Well, it's ridiculous, isn't it? It's like beyond Castle Dracula, isn't it? It's like almost like Dante's Inferno, kind of like levels of like ridiculously impossible engineering. You know, the camera then pans lovingly up this, you know, model, and you know, it's just. It's wonderful, isn't it? Like, it's really haunting.
It just goes on and on and on and on. Yeah, and the bones in the desert as well. You know, when they're in the desert of whatever it's called, they're crossing the desert, and you know, I really, again, I felt the peril especially when I was a kid watching it. I felt that they were gonna dehydrate. We not even talked about the Titanic sequence as well.
And plenty of ice.
Plenty of ice. Yeah, it's brilliant.
It's so good. Well, I mean, it's funny when we talk about like how the sort of Python-esque bits keep coming back, because, you know, like the bit when they first land in the Time of Legends and, you know, they're picked up by that ogre's like fishing ship is like, that couple is ridiculous and great, you know, like the kind of, there's one line that really made me laugh this time is, you know, when the ogre's talking about how like it used to be all like boots and junk and like wistfully he's talking about all this stuff, and now it's prawns all the bloody time, and he just mutters anti-pollution. Like who's enforcing that like there, you know? It's like...
They are amazing. That couple, you know, just grotesque as well. And it's that thing of again, it's that equal opportunities thing of just giving. You can make women's roles grotesque as well. You know, the women don't always have to be rolling their eyelids at what the men are doing. And in that ogre sequence, the actress who plays the wife of the ogre is far more grotesque than the ogress, you know, in her intentions and everything, and
dangerous.
Again, and there was another scene of genuine peril where I thought they were going to get eaten, you know, and chopped up, you know, and then the back, they'll have bad back. It's brilliant.
Just the fact that he's called Winston as well is amazing.
Yeah, the best name for an ogre.
You've got to stop them, Winston.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful like kind of suburban name for him to have. Like, it's just great.
Is she the actor who plays the lead's mother in Brazil? You know, the one with the stretched out face job.
I think she is actually. Yeah, that's a good catch. It's interesting, isn't it? I thought it meant this is probably a lot of Gilliam heads like know this already, but like, you know, Gilliam himself has talked about Time Bandits being, I think he's referred to it as the first of his imagination trilogy, and the way he sees that is, I think it's quite tenuous, you know, but like the way he sees that is like, you know, Kevin is the child dealing with this absurd, scary world, and the protagonist in Brazil is the man dealing with this scary world, and then Baron von Munchausen is the old man who's dealing with this and, you know, kind of reflecting on it and stuff like that, and it's sort of three ages of man kind of thing, you know, which I think is just
that
him.
Makes sense, yeah.
You know, it's sort of makes sense, but also is just kind of him saying, I make these crazy movies, really. Like, you know,
they're all on a similar plane of absolutely insane. I watched Munchausen recently. I thought it was amazing, and I'm really, I mean, talk about practical effects. You know, it was a well-known nightmare shoot to create all those amazing practical effects, and it really pays off because it looks incredible. But yeah, I watched it about a year ago for the first time, and it was brilliant. It was amazing. Oliver Reed's in it. You know, Oliver Reed's in a Terry Gilliam film.
I'd completely forgotten that.
Yeah, he plays like King of Thunder or something, or King of Storms or something like that. And he's advocating nuclear assault or something. It's just amazing.
One I've been meaning to rewatch for a while is Fear and Loathing. You know, because I've when I first saw that, I hadn't read the Hunter S. Thompson source material, and I have since. So, you know, it's been a long time though. You know, so I'd like to rewatch that.
That's still the only movie I've ever seen that portrays drugs properly.
Right.
You know, that's like the only film that really gets it. You know what I mean?
For all the grotesquerie and kind of, you know, oddness and sort of threatening environments and ridiculous performances and everything.
And there's no plot. There's no plot. That's what I love about Fear and Loathing. There's no 3-act structure in it. There isn't. And it works, and it works every time. You know, it's like, but there really is no plot to it.
Yeah.
At all. You know, I mean, what's the plot of Fear and Loathing?
Well, there's barely one in Time Bandits in some ways. You know, because like the thing about them, like, you know, getting, you know, sort of sidetracked to the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness and everything is like, you know, that's a plot by evil to lure them in and steal the map and. You know, I mean, it's sort of like that plot is imposed on them. Really, it's not even like Kevin's idea or anything like that. You know, it's kind of. But that's. I mean, you know, the actors in this movie, they range all over the place because, you know, we said Gilliam at this point was largely leaving his Python roots behind, but of course someone that he'd carried from Holy Grail, not carried from Holy Grail, but, you know, someone who is in Jabberwocky then, and who's in this movie as well, and in Brazil actually, is Michael Palin. who turns up in this in two cameos, two like time switching, almost like Blackadder-esque cameos with Shelley Duvall of all people.
And that's right, and then Shelley Duvall fresh off The Shining, as well. So apparently when they were filming in the rain of Epping Forest, like and they had the rain machine plugged on them, like Michael Palin said, "Oh God, this must be really horrible for you," and she said, "No, it's better than crying for 6 months straight with Stanley Kubrick."
God, yeah.
So which I'm sure it was.
I'm sure it was. I'd definitely take the Epping Forest rain. Yeah, that's no. She's so hilarious in this. I mean, she I told you when I was looking at Shelley Duvall's career recently, and she did like a bunch of children's TV, and like both before and after this, and became like quite an influential TV producer and stuff. And she's just so hilarious in this. And Michael Palin's playing on top form, and their dialogue is just ridiculous. Obviously they crop up first in the Robin Hood sequence, and then on the Titanic as well. I mean that's one of those running gags that I could actually stand more of it. Like if they just cropped up as like peasants in the time of legends or something. That's actually
it's actually, it feels in a way a little bit underdone, which is crazy. Like I could do with more. And the recurring problem with the tie to the tree, and just like, oh no, the problem, I must have fruit.
I was gonna say
it's one of the best lines in cinema history.
I must have fruit's hilarious. Yeah, no, they're just incredible. It's just that extra spice that you don't really. It'd be a great movie without that, but they're just delightful, aren't they? Fantastic.
Michael Palin's just got it as well, hasn't he? He is just funny. Like he doesn't have to do anything. He's just he's just got. There's something special about Michael Palin. I just think in a way, I think he might be. We could talk about this in another show, but he might be my favourite Python. I think the way he takes a fall as well, like in the fish slapping dance, for example. I don't think anyone quite falls like him. He's just funny.
Well, and almost like the cliche of him being, anyone who's watched like Monty Python Flying Circus, he actually plays a range of characters, but like the cliche of him as like the nicest man in Britain, which seems to have taken hold at least since the late 80s. Like the way before that almost became a thing, like the way Gilliam uses that in Brazil as like the things the nicest man might be capable of behind closed doors, and it's just
that with the mask, what was he called, Jack? Is that the name of his character?
Yeah, I think you're
surgeon,
right. Yeah, he's
oh my God.
He's unforgettable in that, isn't he? Partly because he is Michael Palin, and you used him as the nicest man in the world.
Well, he does play Luigi Focati as well. You've got a nice army base here, Colonel. The shame if something were to happen to it.
Italian icon.
Yes.
Yeah. We should talk actually about because just actor after actor in this, but obviously at the end the sort of couldn't be a more literal Deus Ex Machina, could it? Like when all the forces of history have failed to contain evil, he's just about to destroy them presumably, and then he just sparks into that wonderful like kind of gothic stone statue thing, and then Ralph Richardson shows up as God, which is just incredible, isn't it?
As the best portrayal of God ever, the sort of duffy old headmaster version of God. It's that's an amazing. I mean, talk about props to have as well. The frozen evil statue would be like what a cool prop that would be.
Oh, it'd be amazing. I love that bit when he first freezes, and then it just you have those like few seconds. We've talked about this before, how amazing it is, where it's smoking and you just hear that little sound effect. It's just like there's a few little sound effects, and then it just goes like ping, and then just, and then it explodes. Just like explodes again. It doesn't have to do that.
Explodes again. Yeah, it goes from a perfect likeness in carbon to a slightly worse likeness. Yeah. I wonder what happened. I mean, that could have been as simple as they destroyed the first one, so they had to, create another one. Who knows? Like, that could have been to cover a mistake. That scene like that. But
I suppose it gives you the shrapnel of evil at the end there, doesn't it? Which you get, but you don't really need that. It's not, there are other ways to do that in the plot. So it's like,
that is a good point though. I didn't think of that. Yeah, because that piece has to be left. Because they say we've got to collect all this. So Ralph Richardson shows up. And his first thing is he appears out of a huge, like heavenly puff of smoke, and he's just like, oh God, and he's like wiping the dust off. He's like, I do hate appearing like that. So what does he say? So vulgar or something?
Well, you just wouldn't. I remember as a kid, I just loved him, because it's just that kind of. Me and Matt didn't really have a religious upbringing, no more so than just growing up in the UK in general. We had a pretty secular upbringing, but it's
thank God we didn't.
Yeah, but just something about that portrayal of God kind of stuck with me. As you say, that officious schoolmaster thing. And it's just the way he interacts with the entire gang, isn't it, as well? And like Randall, you kind of realise that Randall's like one of his like sub deputies basically, and just kind of they go into that kind of workplace relationship straight away, like minor civil servants basically.
Yeah. That's exactly, that's true. There's nobody really challenges him, apart from obviously Kevin asks him, why do we have to have evil? Which is a great scene, because he says, you might as well ask, why do we have to have evil? And Randall says, none of us would be stupid enough to ask that, sir. And then Kevin says, yes, why do we have to have evil? Yeah. And he goes, and he disappears behind a wall for just a beat. He comes back and he says, I think it's something to do with free will, and then moves on. I mean, it's brilliant.
I like the way it's almost like the suggestion that like God, these things that like kind of classical Christians believe and stuff, like that Christian theologians came up with and codified. It's like the fact that God doesn't disagree with those, but it's kind of not his job to know. It's not that he does agree with them, but it's like he probably has an underling who takes care of that. It's like he's not a details guy. It's like it's just such a wonderful portrayal, isn't it? Like I love it.
And the theological, the philosophical, theological statement of I created evil. I think evil turned out quite well. As if it's something that is necessary, and it does actually kind of bring up a lot of questions. And I'm sure essays have been written, but it's also just wonderfully silly as well.
Yeah, it's wonderfully silly and satirical, and also like in a sort of plot level, not that you really need to. It kind of justifies the ending, doesn't it? Because of course he couldn't. Well, maybe he could, but of course he's not going to destroy evil. It's his.
Yeah, well, it's like, that's true, but also like I've just thought now, God is there. Kevin is a good person. God is there and doesn't save him.
Yeah,
he just leaves him. Basically, I mean that the ending we have to talk about, because basically the gang and the Supreme Being, disappear. And God says Kevin needs to stay here and continue the fight. Kevin wants to go with him. He's begging them to let him go with him. Kevin then wakes up in his bedroom and it's full of smoke, and he gets saved by a fireman who just happens to be Sean Connery, who gives him a sly wink. Then his parents basically they fail to pick up one piece of concentrated evil from the David Warner statue. Their parents are going into the house because there's a house fire. They're saving all the artwork. They come out with the microwave oven or whatever it is, and the piece of evil is in the oven. And they think it's a roast or something, don't they? And Kevin says, "Mum and Dad, don't touch that," and they immediately touch it, which I think is just brilliant. Both because it's just like again the role reversal of the parent,
and blown to smithereens,
and they explode. They explode, and no one seems to notice this, including the fire marshals, and they drive off and leave Kevin an orphan. So that's how the movie ends.
And then,
I mean, if you actually imagine that written down, if you read that ending, like the studio, I say the studio, George Harrison was fine with it.
Yeah, well, it's almost like something like Matilda. It's very Dahl-esque, definitely, but like it's kind of, it's like Matilda if Miss Honey didn't adopt her at the end. Like it's just, instead she just was left. And then, the cosmic nature of it is just emphasised, isn't it, by the zoom out with that, crazy lift up through the cosmos, and then that. A great thing of like I presume meant to be Ralph Richardson hands rolling the map of the universe up and take it away to that George Harrison music,
which is amazing, and also Men in Black totally stole.
That's true. That's a really good point.
Like, the marbles.
That's a really good point. Yeah, they did. I mean, the ending of the movie with the ultimate zoom out is such a terrific power move. It's great. I mean, I think I wanted to talk very briefly because this movie kind of is really interesting to analyse on subconscious and artistic levels and everything like that, and obviously Gilliam would go on to do loads much more kind of sort of statement stuff afterwards, like Brazil, for example. But I was thinking one of the sort of like only like big like themes in this, in a way, apart from intelligence and imagination and creativity and stuff, is the devil, the sort of evil rather, seems to have this kind of bizarre fixation on technology and kind of like this thing that humans have come up with that he's impressed with, right? And it's kind of, and it seems, the only way I can interpret it is it seems to tie into Kevin's parents' like terribly boring, banal commodity fetishism at the start, right? It's like they are a bit like Dahl characters, but they're a bit like Matilda's parents in the sense they ignore him, but they're just like robotically obsessed. They're like hypnotized by commercialism, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's obviously and then evil completely mimics that, and you see he's exactly the same. So that's a fairly obvious sort of duality there.
I think that's where you get Terry Gilliam, the kind of old and increasingly crotchety hippie, starting to seep into his film work in a way, does it? That's kind of
yeah. Even by the early 80s, it's clearly there, and it's that's what I think. There are so many what you'd call now Easter eggs, in that film, in terms of you know, like we said before, like if you look at Kevin's the floor of Kevin's room, his toys are all strewn across the floor. There's a space fighter. There is cowboys and Indian models. There are like Lego bricks. There's pictures as well on the wall, I think, of some of historical settings. Basically, I think every sort of set piece that he visits is basically on the floor of his room. So they do play a little bit with that, you know, maybe it was all a dream sort of thing, but then they quickly, you know, I mean, I don't believe that, you know, I don't think that's what it is at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's superb, and it's really, really funny as well. Like, you know, just for, you know, in terms of just a lot. I mean, there's not a dull scene in the whole thing for spectacle or for laughs.
It moves at a real clip, doesn't it? You know, like I was even saying that there, the Greek sort of sequence. You know, like as I say, that seemed like the long sequence when we were kids, but that doesn't. As I say, that's like maybe 12, 14 minutes. You know, and that's if that, and even that, loads of stuff happens in that as well. You know. Yeah,
it's brilliant, and there's never a dull moment. I absolutely love it. I am often surprised though of. That's how many of my peers have not seen it.
Yeah,
there are a lot of people I know who just don't even know it exists.
Yeah,
you know, and that's like, you know, that's a real shame because, yeah, it's cult for sure, but it's one of the best films of the 80s, no doubt.
Oh, that's a bold statement. And you know, on that note, we'll leave it. But you know, Matt, could you tell us where people can find you and find your recent work?
So I still do a podcast with my friend Mike. It's called Matt and Mike Pull Focus. So we're on YouTube, if you and we're on Instagram and Facebook if you want to find us on there as well. We just did an interview with the author Joseph Delaney, who wrote the Spook's Apprentice novels, and that was adapted into the film Seventh Son. So we did a really cool interview with him recently. We've got a few lined up for the year. We're continuing with our guest format. So every episode that we do, we've got a guest who's either an author, a filmmaker, or you know, everything in between, really. So yeah, check us out.
Lovely stuff. Thank you, and thanks for joining me, Matt. It was an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure, dude. I could talk about Time Bandits and/or Terry Gilliam all day.
Yeah, me too. That was terrific. It felt like a good one to get out of the system. That so if you haven't seen Time Bandits, do watch it.
Defo.
And we'll see you next time on the show. Thank you.
Mum? Dad?
You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.